it's such a raw pain. You don't have the personalities to be able to reflect back as you do in usual grief.
Jenny Kovacs.
Jenny Kovacs.
My name's Jenny Kovacs.
Give it up for Jenny.
Jenny Kovacs, the queen of being seen.
Some of your listeners might be listening to this or watching this and thinking, that's a bit,
Do you think that she made those comments just based on your external appearance?
I think that I wanted to be understood, had to be understood, and somehow kind of camouflaged into my environment. I think that I had to fit in. So can you imagine what it would have been like when they then came to the UK and people were kind of saying, go back home, go back to where you came from, and they're like, but you wanted us here. And out loud she said, I don't expect you'll do that well, Jenny. I was quite stunned, but I didn't challenge it, and neither did anyone else in the room. And she didn't even go, oh, sorry, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But I remember this voice going, watch me.
Jenny.
Hello.
Firstly, welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to touch on what I find really fascinating about why I think the purpose of this podcast ties in so well with the work that you're doing now.
Okay.
One of your biggest selling points, or what you're known for, is this being more visible. And, speaking from certain cultural backgrounds, being visible isn't always something that's celebrated or taught or even encouraged in any light. So take me back to the story of your previous generations. I'd love to know, what led to you ending up being brought up in the UK?
So my story, despite my name, don't be fooled by my name. There's a whole new story on that. But my parents were both born in Barbados, but they met here in the UK, not far down the road. And had it not have been for them, I would have maybe been Bajan born. So Bajans being Barbados. So what had happened was, and my mum spoke about this for years, but a lot of people didn't really talk about this, or it didn't become common knowledge. So there was a massive recruitment drive in Barbados, common knowledge now, but about even 20 years ago, people thought that literally people were like looking through some sort of lens and seeing Great Britain as the place to escape to and come and set up a life and make loads of money. But the truth is, my mum was a 19-year-old, had never been away from home. You've got to think about this. Barbados is like 21 miles wide and long and 14 miles wide in its widest point. It's a tiny island. And she saw some advert in a newspaper. She said it was a double-page spread. Come to England, we'll give you a career, we'll give you somewhere to stay, we'll look after you, and there's good career prospects. And at 19, having never left Barbados, she thought, okay, I'll do it. What's interesting was the job that she applied for was to be a nurse. And my mum told me many years ago that when she went into a hospital in Barbados, the smell used to make her physically sick. So I'm like, well, why on earth would you go for a nursing job in an environment like that you don't like? But that's what she did. I think she just wanted to go for a job and get away from home. There's no sinister stories behind it. She's one of quite a big family, one of 8. So maybe she wanted to stamp her mark, make her mark. My dad, on the other hand, had a promising career as a teacher. And I'm not really sure of his motives for coming to the UK apart from applying for a job. And he ended up coming over and working for the British transport system, but not for very long. So they met over here and they had me, got married, had me, and very quickly moved from Harrow, basically, Middlesex, and went up to East Anglia. Leafy East Anglia. And again, when I asked, well, why did you do that? You could have lived anywhere in the UK. It was greener. The councils were offering accommodation, raise your family. It'll be similar to being back at home. So off we went. But the strange thing is that when I then grew up in East Anglia, there weren't that many black families around me. So it's a real kind of a hodgepodge. It feels accidental, but things always happen for a reason. And that's how I ended up being here. It's a strange story, I think, anyway.
Was there, at the time that your parents did move here, of course, at separate times, was this a common theme or pattern that was occurring? Was there a mass movement of people from Barbados to London or to the UK?
Yeah. My mum tells me the story that the recruitment drive, they were hitting it hard in Barbados. It wasn't just, come and handpick a couple of people. It was relentless advertising. So can you imagine what it would have been like when they then came to the UK and people were kind of saying, go back home, go back to where you came from. And they're like, but you wanted us here. Nursing at that time wasn't a job that people took as a profession. It was basically wiping people's backsides and cleaning up, bodily fluids. Nobody thought of it back then as a career. But they were, kind of coerced or persuaded to come over. So yeah, it was very kind of different sides of the coin, very much persuaded, let's come over. And yes, it hit pretty hard. It would have been just after the Windrush generation piece, but yeah, lots of people came over, and a few friends came over as well. So they lived together in the UK or worked in the same place in the UK and kind of went from there. And I always think it's really funny because at that point, many years ago, I was in London and my mum went, look, see that bus driver? That's so-and-so. I went to school with him. I said, go and say hello. And she wouldn't, but it just goes to show how, like, from such a small island at that particular time, how many people did take that opportunity to come over.
It sounds also, especially from your dad's story being a teacher, one thing I've heard a lot from previous guests is, especially from places across Africa and Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, there's this common brush that they get painted with that the people that leave are in search, sure, for better employment, but they usually are of, heavy industry, low skilled background. But really, when you boil down to it, and especially some of the people I've spoken to, their families have actually come from quite a high skilled or professional background. And what was occurring in that country was quite a brain drain, where it was it was a mix. It was the low skill, but also the high skill ones that were leaving. What was the situation like from, the population coming over from Barbados? Was it a similar case?
I suspect it was. The honest answer is I don't know. I suspect it was. My dad having this promising career and then coming over to the UK. Perhaps he thought to himself, I'll go to Great Britain and I'll be a teacher there. What I think is interesting, not necessarily from my parents, but what I see in a lot of like Caribbean communities specifically, is that later on in life, it's almost like they go back and say, actually, I was going to do this. I'm going to study. My mum went to university in her 30s. She had us. And I just see a lot of people from that kind of background. It's like they remember who they were, remember the path that they were on and think, right, I'm going to do it, if they haven't had that will or motivation knocked out of them in some way, shape or form. So I imagine there was a pretty big drain in Barbados, especially with the emphasis is very, very different. I think with a lot of people that haven't originated in the UK, where it's like either go for a doctor or a lawyer's job or study. My parents describe a lot of fun going to school. They really enjoyed school. And that still exists to this day in a lot of other countries. Whereas I can't imagine the kind of shock of us going to school, them trying to instill those values in us, and then we're kind of coming home and, I don't want to go to school. Like, we didn't have a choice, Caribbean parents. Yeah. And other people say, my mum says I don't have to go to school if I don't want to, So that must have been a real sort of strange thing to get used to, I guess, as well.
Yeah. So you grew up in East Anglia, as you said, not many other black families around. What was that like, both, well, firstly for your parents at the time, and then you from your earliest memories?
So I imagine for my parents, it was like the black family over there from Jamaica, or this family, you know, so there were a handful of families. It was literally at my school, there were a couple of token black families. There was the token Sikh family, you know, token, you know, I can't imagine or remember that there were any, like there was no Eastern European or anything like that. So I think for them, I think it must have been shocking. My mum was so young, and, you know, my dad was only a couple of years older. Like, to come to a different country in your teens and have to kind of address the culture shock, probably the racism as well. Well, no, probably about it. The attitudes, you know, people probably saying things that were at that time probably quite inappropriate, you know. I've spoken to so many friends over the years, you know, people comment on, oh, your food smells nice, and your fellow countrymen, and all of this kind of weird stuff. I think for them it must have been strange and weird. The thing that I definitely detect from my parents is there's no kind of animosity or bitterness, you know. So I think that's quite interesting. But on them, I think it would have been strange. Things like, I remember this, we were in East Anglia, so if my mum wanted to cook plantain, we couldn't get it. Like in Peterborough or Cambridge, we had to go to London. And at times where we would go to Luton, for example, there'd be like a couple of shops where you could get yams or plantain from. On the flip side of that, because I wasn't brought up in the Caribbean with Caribbean food, I'd be a bit like, ooh, that's a bit stringy. I'm not sure about that, you know. And the other clue, and this sounds strange, but I think a lot of my life, I look backwards and I join the dots, you know, connect the dots. I sound like this because of my upbringing. I think in some way, shape or form, I'm not ashamed of my roots in any way, shape or form, but I think that I had to fit in. So, you know, even before people were aware of, you know, Black Lives Matter and things, I've always been told from quite an early age, you're so articulate without the microaggression. You know, you're so articulate. You said that really well. And I think that I wanted to be understood, had to be understood, and somehow kind of camouflaged into my environment. So how it affected me at the time, I didn't really think anything of it. My friends were my friends. You know, my school friends were my school friends. We went to church when I was smaller, although I fell off the wagon at about 16 and rebelled. But, you know, I think I just accepted what was. And there were a few times, I remember when I was younger, I was playing with a friend from school, and my dad opened the door and said, Jennifer, Deborah, my sister, you know, you need to come in soon, dinner's ready. And one of my friends said, what did your dad just say? I can't understand him. And he doesn't have that thick of an accent. So it was times like that, I'd be like, how strange. What does she mean she can't understand my dad? And there were times as a child that even though I was talkative, I would mumble. And I don't know, looking back, whether that was, I better not say anything just in case, you know, people don't understand me or like me or whatever that was. So I think it had an effect throughout my life. But weirdly, more as I've got older, I've gone, oh, of course, that's why I do things. On the flip side, for me, because I can talk about those experiences, it made me very, very good in white spaces. And I know that some of your listeners might be listening to this or watching this and thinking, that's a bit, you know, but I can get into a boardroom in Canary Wharf with top executives. I can fit in, I can mould in, I can be accepted like that. And in some ways, when I see that people don't have that opportunity, I really want to like help them just to kind of like maybe camouflage themselves, but not be who they are, fully be themselves without losing themselves, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I think ultimately, to kind of round off the answer to that question, for me, again, I wasn't ashamed of my roots or ashamed of my colour or heritage. I was confused because I felt to some respects, I guess, like even up to my late 20s, I felt too black to be white and too white to be black. So I didn't really know where I fitted in. And I guess I hadn't really decided where I fitted in. All of that, I think, came from that kind of, that era.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And you touch on not being ashamed, but confused. Do you think did you have any elements of your family culture or maybe traditions at home that made you feel quite different to, the people around you that maybe you felt you wanted to keep hidden? Not in a way, again, that you were ashamed, but just it stopped you speaking out or being proud of them because it was different to what you saw around you.
Yeah, I think there were a few of them. I think one of the first thing is actually a behavioural thing. I remember talking to a client about this many, many years ago. This whole concept of going to school, coming home, giving your parents lip did not happen in our family. You give your parents lip, you'd get slapped around the face, And even now people say, oh, no, you can't smack your children. So I think it was like an attitude more than anything else. I guess the other thing culturally was the whole mix of food. So out of the black families that did live in the place that we lived in, if they had a party, they'd be like, jerk chicken, curry goat and all of that. And like they had to make it because you couldn't buy it from anywhere. So you'd get thrown into this melting pot of culture. And I found it fascinating. I never wanted to hide it. The other thing I found fascinating and didn't want to hide was from the age of 4, we went to Sunday school. We went to church. The church was in a man's house who was from another Caribbean island. And, it'd be people would describe it as happy clappy now, but they'd be playing tambourines, singing, dancing. It was a really fun place to be. And I was like some sort of church advocate. I'd be going to school and saying, oh, you need to come with me to Sunday school. And people would go back, speak to their parents, and their parents would let them come to church. I was like, come on in, it's really fun at our church. And although they didn't stay for a long time, I was never ashamed of that or never embarrassed. I guess I hadn't learnt that embarrassment from other surroundings. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything I was embarrassed about. And I think... I don't think I was ever embarrassed or wanted to hide anything. I think it was frustrating. So as, fashion came out and my friends would have their perms and stuff, I couldn't have the same perm as them. I'd have to adapt. I remember my mum getting an Avon catalogue with lots of testers and me putting on this red lipstick, which looked awful. It wasn't made for black skin tones. So that became more frustrating than embarrassing, trying to fit in. And then Madonna with her laced gloves. I remember wearing this, buying a laced glove and wearing it. And my mum and dad were like, no child of mine's going to be wearing that. Get that off right now, So then you would find those kind of like culture bumpers, if you like, culture barriers. And I think the embarrassment would be I'd have to go to school and say, oh, I'm not allowed to wear that, or I'm not allowed to hang around in the town centre, I'm not allowed to do that. But I would still say it anyway, so.
Would you say you grew up in a strict household?
I think so. I think my dad was more strict than my mum. And my dad is so like opposite now. So my dad felt his duty, and you might not like what I'm about to say, his duty bringing up 2 daughters, that they would A, be able to look after themselves, and B, be able to look after the forthcoming men, children, family in their lives. So my dad thought it was important that we learnt how to cook and clean and do all of those things. As it happened, I loved cooking from a very young age anyway. But it was almost like he was training us to be good people and training us to basically be good wives. But again, was he strict about it? He was strict in terms of our behaviour. We had to be polite. In fact, we would never have thought of being rude to anybody. And I guess in the coaching world now, people talk about being a people pleaser, but I think it really stemmed from that upbringing, My mum was My mum was quite strict. She expected good behaviour and all of that kind of stuff. But she was the one that was most likely to smack us than my dad, you know. And I joke about the stare. I've joked to, you know, within people and places that I've worked, you know, the black woman stare. It's like, you do not disobey a black woman when she looks at you in a certain way. You're like, what? So, yeah, maybe I learnt that from my mum.
You are described as having been a talkative toddler.
Yes.
And then even through your, you know, early teen years, probably going into your young adult years as well. In a lot of cultures, and, you know, speaking from experience, coming from a background of having, you know, Indian ethnicity, but East African born parents, what I see in them especially, and then it can influence the, you know, my generation, is that often speaking up is not always encouraged ahead of working hard and keeping your head down and letting your actions do the talking.
Yeah.
Which, you know, of course, letting your actions speak is important. You can't just speak all words, right? I think that's very well accepted. What led you, do you think, to have this, you know, talkative, energetic side to you? Was it something that was encouraged, or was it you very much going against the grain?
I think it happened by accident, like most things. I don't know. Maybe if like one of my family were here, they'd say, oh no. But my mum says that from the moment I could talk, I talked and didn't shut up. And, you know, the reason I warn people that I'm talkative is because it's a warning. Like, don't think that I can talk. I can listen as well. So I think talking was of interest to me. Yes, I was talkative as a toddler. My mum said I spoke really early. And the first kind of red flag was sometimes inappropriately. Apparently there's a story of when I was really small, maybe under 18 months. There was a woman across the road that used to keep coming and borrowing sugar or something. And my mum had said one day, oh, gosh, I wish that woman would just go to the shops and buy her own sugar. So, of course, the door knocks, you know, the letterbox. I look through the letterbox. I see the woman standing there, and I'm alleged to have said, Mummy, you know that woman that you said she should go and buy her own sugar? She's at the door. So, yeah, my mum was pleased with that. So I think from that point, although I don't remember that incident, there would have been some sort of dialogue afterwards that said, Jennifer, shush, you don't repeat what I say in the house, or something like that, you know? So I think it would have started from there. Then I think about my days of Sunday school and church. That actually encouraged me to speak. If you think about it, although I was initially nervous about public speaking, to go every Sunday and see somebody standing at the front, reading something, asking the audience questions, engagement and all of that kind of stuff, and being expected to speak back kind of builds a really good foundation for speaking and presenting, and probably doing it in a more natural way. So there's all these like iterations of things that went through. People often talk about, you know, at school where the teacher says, oh, stand up and read. Although I didn't necessarily like that, it didn't put the fear of God into me, you know. It was just one of those things. And quite often I didn't get kind of picked to stand up and read, even though I started off school with a really high reading age. Again, parents know that education's important. I remember sitting on my mum's knee, and from 4, she taught me to read and write. You know, there were the Peter and Jane books and the gaps, and I could write my name, I could write the alphabet, and I could read. So I always had a high reading age. And I weirdly attached that to the whole kind of language and speaking thing. So there's all these like influences at the start, and I think that's important. But I think the most important thing, and it sounds weird to say this, I didn't realise this until it was 2011. I'd been a year into a business, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was saying, oh, I really hate public speaking. And I said, well, let me help you. And she was talking about EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping. So she was qualified in that, and she was talking to me and getting me to tap because I was talking about something else. And this memory came back of something that had been said to me so often that I'd almost kind of like forgotten about it. And that's the thing of my mum saying, you know, Jennifer, be careful who you go talking your business to. Be quiet, you know, don't talk. That's telling somebody, and a lot of parents do it without meaning to cause any harm. That's telling your child, shut up, don't speak. You know, what I'm saying or what you're saying isn't important. Whereas that's a very cultural thing. Whereas a lot of other people say they were brought up with children should be seen and not heard. I don't know if that's the same for kind of, you know, African, Asian, Caribbean. My parents never said children should be seen or not heard. They just said, Jennifer, be quiet. Like you're sitting in church, be quiet. You're talking in the house. Don't you go repeating what we're saying. It was almost like this secretive thing, even though what they were saying wasn't really that interesting, you know? So I think there was some of that affected things as I grew up, maybe. I don't know.
For the people that know you already, you know, they'll know how illustrious your career has been.
That's the first time I've heard it described as that, so thank you.
No problem. But, you know, of course, from the angle that I gather from it, none of it was given to you. You know, it was very much you worked your way up to achieve that level of success and the hard work it took and kind of finding your place. The ability to do that, there's a really interesting book called The Triple Package, and it talks about how people from immigrant backgrounds have managed to achieve such a level of success. And it focuses around, you know, CEOs in the US, but it talks about globally where there's been pockets of these people who have far surpassed others who are not from that kind of background. And it's called the triple package because it touches on three things. One is growing up with a superiority complex. The second is growing up with an inferior mindset. So it's kind of contrasting the first point, but I'll explain why. And then the third is this idea of having impulse control. So the superiority complex, the first one, is this idea that a lot of background cultures, you know, you can look at the Judaism, Sikhism, even, you know, parts of Christianity. It very much teaches this message that they are a superior ethnicity, either because the teaching is, you know, they have the most original teachings from God, or they are the race that's been sent from God to spread a message or to do well. And even if you look at in, you know, the Indian caste system, there's the Brahminical or the Brahmanas at the top. So they're viewed as the ones who are going to be the most successful, the ones that are most pious and the ones to spread the message. So when there's that kind of belief instilled in you, it gives you that empowerment that you are sent here to do well and succeed. Then the inferiority side comes from the idea of, you know, kind of what you may have experienced growing up in a place where, you know, you're a black family who are from a different part. So like you said, you know, go back to where you're from because this is our space. And so you're always on the back foot where you have to prove yourself. Yeah. And then the third one is the impulse control of, do you have the ability to sacrifice short-term pleasure because you know there's a long-term vision that you want to achieve? Okay. So those are you know, it's fascinating in this case where do you see elements of your journey to, you know, those initial moments of success when you worked at Thomas Cook Direct and, you know, achieved smashing through your target numbers? Were any of these elements or all of these elements something that you saw contribute to you being able to achieve that level of progress in your life?
It's interesting because the first thing I want to say is when you're saying you achieved a level of success, I'm like, no, I didn't. I just did what I had to do. But it's interesting, taking Thomas Cook Direct, I had travelled for like independently for the summer with some friends. And on that holiday, decided that I wanted to have a career in travel. Now, when I came back to the UK, by that point, I lived in Peterborough, which was where all the head offices were. And I applied for a job with Thomas Cook's and didn't get it. And this makes me sound like a dinosaur, but it was kind of pre-internet. So I wrote a letter. I remember my sister saying, you can't do that. It's really rude. I wrote a letter And I just said, look, if any other positions come up or anything that you think I'm more qualified for, let me know. What was interesting from the kind of, I was one of the first newbies to hit £1 million in sales. But what was interesting for that was I remember the induction. I was the only black woman there. In fact, I think I was the only person of colour there, full stop. And I want to say girl because I was quite young. And I remember there was this woman that had worked for like Freddie Laker's airline as an air hostess, and this guy who worked with his dad in a travel agency, and people had worked for other travel agencies. And I think based a bit on that, and based on maybe a bit of unconscious bias, the person doing the induction, she went round and said, oh, this person's going to be brilliant because you've had this experience. And out loud, she said, I don't expect you'll do that well, Jenny. And I didn't challenge it. I was quite stunned, but I didn't challenge it, and neither did anyone else in the room. And she didn't even go, oh, sorry, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But I remember this voice going, watch me, like just a little voice, watch me. And I think the third point that you spoke to, I think it has, was it the third or the second? Anyway, I think it had something to do with that. Because she said, oh, I don't think you'll be that good at this, I was like, okay, I need to prove myself. I really need to prove myself. So when I got onto Thomas Cook Direct, which was a call centre, it was a massive open plan centre, received loads of awards and stuff. I just wanted to do well. And I always wanted to do well. It's my work ethic, which definitely came. But when I was selling holidays, there were people being like applauded and held up. Oh, look at this person. She just sold a 45 grand cruise. And I was like, I want to do that. So there was a bit of determination, grit. And I think ringing in my ears, there was a bit of, well, you're never going to do that. Oh yeah, let me show you. So I think that probably did, contribute to that success in that time.
Do you think that she made those comments just based on your external appearance?
Do you know what? I look back now and I think maybe she did. Maybe there was obviously the colour piece of it, although I don't think that she was necessarily racist or biased. I just think because I was so young, I hadn't learned how to conduct myself, hadn't learned how to position myself. If somebody had said that to me now, I would have said, hold on a second, what made you say that? Can we talk about this? And I would have handled it, whether they'd gone down the angry route or the welcoming route or whatever. But I think it was a combination of those things. My appearance, as I say, I was the only black person in that round of people. And every time there were pictures taken, of course, there was me and Gamal Singh and Jane, who came from Jamaica. We were always in the pictures. But I think, I think it was the whole package. It was the way I conducted myself. I was very young, very new to business and being professional. And, knowing how to conduct myself. And I just think she just made a massive assumption.
And after a career spanning all those years, and, you've covered a lot of big names that people know. I think there's BT, there's Abbey National. You then seem to have this, as I see it, almost like a light bulb moment, or this feeling that you wanted to hone in on something more and help people. Where do you think that came from?
Again, I would answer that was accidental. But one of the things that happened through Thomas Cook's was I always liked cooking as a child, and I loved making cakes, special occasion cakes. So I can say it now, they've closed. But I actually, after I came back from travelling and I worked at Thomas Cook's, I, on a Sunday, used to do this car boot sale that only sold cakes and at that time, not handmade chocolates, but like cakes and trifles and desserts and things like that. And I used to virtually clear out in a couple of hours. I couldn't be bothered to sit there for more hours to get rid of the rest of my cakes. So what I would do is I'd take them into Thomas Cook's on a Monday, and we had this little intranet thing, and I'd just say cakes on my desk, and I'd just sell them to people around me who then started ordering other cakes. Now, I tell that story because at that point, I thought I'd love to start a business doing this all the time. But I was scared. No one in my family really had a business before. So I had this, what does it mean to start a business? How do I have to be? What about tax and stuff like that? How does it all work? So I just decided that maybe it was too early on to open a business, too complicated. So that was like the first kind of iteration of that. I just didn't really know what to do. By the time I did start a business, it was well over a decade before I got the courage, the bravery, kind of nuanced down what I wanted to do a bit more. So it was a journey.
Yeah.
It was a journey.
You talk about how you once became obsessed with how we all have the same number of hours in a day, yet we use or approach them very differently. And what you wanted to do was help people to maximize the potential of those hours. That desire to push to help people, do you see where that may have come from, the way you were raised or the experiences that you went through?
Now, this is going to make me sound like I'm in victim mode, and I really am not. But I think when you are perceived as an underdog, like consistently, and it's interesting because saying this, some of you will hear that and completely resonate with that. And some of you will say, I don't know, what on earth you're talking about? You know, when you're perceived as an underdog and you rise up and do anything, even good, not even great, there's something hugely inspiring, motivating. And I have this belief, we don't all have to do the same thing in the same way. We don't all have to be gazillionaires or whatever. But I think all of us carry a spark in us of wanting to do something great. That great thing might be wanting to be a great parent, or it could be wanting to run a big business, or it could be wanting to get rid of a fear of something, you know? And I think because of my kind of more underdog experiences, it's like I can smell it in people. But rather than call them out on it and you know, embarrass them or anything else like that, I smell the little spark that they have in them, and it's like I can tease it out. And if they don't want to do it, that's fine. It's not down to me. But I really feel like I want to nurture them and help them to bring it out so that they can do the thing that they really want to do. And I think I say it's a journey. I discovered it because I'd speak to people and they'd tell me these things that like, oh, I've just done my first presentation at work. And that they'd literally go, but what I really want to do, and whisper in my ear, is, you know, start a cruise company, or, you know, start a caring something or other, or write poetry. And it's that, you know, when you're speaking to someone and they say something and it's like they get animated and really excited. Yeah. It's that. And I think, come on, let's nurture that. So I think it was a slow burn. Over the years, there's a combination of that. Also, the other thing that I notice, again, when I look back, I do see it a lot. From a very young age, people would tell me their secrets. Like, even to this day, even a few days ago, I was walking down the street and I just said hello to the person passing me, and they asked me a question and we had a quick conversation. But people would tell me their secrets. There was something about me, I think, that made it safe to do that. And even to this day, I know it's become more popular on social media to kind of blast it out and be provocative, but even to this day, I'll still keep people's secrets, which is weird when you think about, you know, visibility as a concept generally. It would probably do me really well to say, I worked with a director who did this and did that and made millions, but, you know, he didn't know how to talk to his wife, you know, but I just don't think that's fair. So there's this kind of dichotomy of harnessing people, keeping their secrets, and then kind of just moving swiftly by. But all of that came over a number of years. There wasn't I don't think there was a big light bulb moment, although probably tonight I'll go, oh my gosh, yes, there was, you know. But yeah, there's a lot of series of little things. I want people to be their best. And I think, honestly, that probably stems from that whole when somebody says something, what they say doesn't match their body language. Like, oh, you're an interesting young man, and they're kind of looking at you with this funny look, and you think, what's that about? I want to help people reduce them not being taken seriously or being dismissed or overlooked, and at least give them the tools of like what to do in those circumstances even before it's happened. So yeah, I think it's been like a combination of all of those things.
And I think you've referred it to before as a crisis of confidence. How can someone look at themselves and see if they are facing this crisis of confidence? Are there external signs, or is it very much something they need to see from the inside?
I think it's something that they already know, they already feel. So the biggest myth that I hear about people is that, oh, well, you're confident, so you're okay. And I think this was highlighted during the pandemic, mental health and things. Oh, they seem so confident, and what happened? A crisis of confidence is kind of a step up from imposter syndrome. It's that thing. And in some ways, it's like when I say, oh, was that success? Oh, well, it just happened. It's the other side of that makes you go, no, I won't take it. It just happened. It was because Mr. Smith gave me this opportunity. It's not that you're not confident. It's not that you can't do the thing. It's just something that has you doubting yourself and almost teetering on the edge. It doesn't quite stop you. I think imposter syndrome stops people. It just has you doubting yourself, second guessing yourself. That, I think, is a feeling. And people that say, no, I don't do feelings, it's like you feel it in your gut. Something's not right. And I think people feel exposed to actually voice it. So, most common examples are, I can't be promoted at work because the new kids in town, I've heard they're younger than me, older than me, smarter than me, they don't know as much, intimidated, all of that kind of stuff points to that kind of crisis of confidence. But it's a feeling. We know we have it, and it's the sort of thing that you likely wouldn't tell your bosses or your family or the people around you, but you feel somehow a little bit inadequate. Not I can't do it at all, but just a little bit inadequate. And I think that's really important. And I think I really got that in my own journey. I worked in financial services, and I worked for this company. They were an amazing company. I was given so many opportunities, and it was where kind of like my later work came from. But the most important thing about this story was that I'd done some really great things within this company, and then the financial crash happened. I was made redundant, and my crisis of confidence sounded like, oh, what if I can never do this again? Like, what if it was just a fluke? What if it was just lucky? How is it like, how am I going to make it happen? And a bit of, oh, well, maybe I just need to sort of like look on a different path and do something different, So that reminded me of what it feels like to really have a crisis of confidence. And again, it's like fear. You can kind of, I think everyone can do it, but apparently they can't. I can sniff it out in people, even people on TV, celebrities, well-known people, they'll, come out and give a presentation, and I can tell which bit of it they don't like. If it's like they don't like the audience looking at them, I don't know. I can just kind of feel it. And that's the crisis of confidence. It doesn't stop them. It just kind of rocks them a bit.
Would it be right to say that a crisis of confidence, not as extreme as imposter syndrome, but still comes from someone not fully being their authentic self, or not even knowing what their authentic self is to then become it?
Absolutely. I'd say that's quite spot on, because one of the questions, it's like such an easy question to ask. If you ask the average person, who are you? They might start off with I'm a lawyer, or I'm a student or something. If you say to them, who are you really? It kind of makes you feel a bit scared. Like, I don't know. Who are you really? And I think a lot of people, they know who they are, but they get it knocked out of them. life knocks it out of them. It might be that they become something else to support their environment, their family, their friends. And a lot of the time they forget who they are. I think it can be extracted again. But when you forget who you are, you need to be reminded,
Mm. And what I love about this visibility specialism that you're going down is, again, referring to the Triple Package book. There's this really interesting series of studies that have done, and it's done enough times to show that there is this statistical influence behind it, where in the US, there were cases done of kids from different ethnical backgrounds, and it was done on gender as well, where they were categorized under certain strengths. So, the classic that Asians from a particular background are very good at mathematics, or even, males are better at spatial awareness, so they're better at the non-verbal reasoning. When in the cases where that group of common people, whether it was the ethnicity, when they were told that here is an exam that's being given to you in order to verify the underlying stereotype that, for example, people from a Chinese background are very good at mathematics. When they knew that it was based on a pre-existing stereotype that favored them, they actually performed quite a bit better. And there are a number of studies done across different cases, which I won't go into, but I'll put the link of the book in the description, because it's fascinating that when you give people, and again, it plays on that superiority complex. So it doesn't just apply to, ethnical and religious and belief backgrounds. It's also the case of when there's this pre-existing stereotype that you are good at something, then there is a chance that you're actually going to perform better at it, because I think internally you feel that belief that I can do this. And again, this is a thing where I guess there are certain backgrounds, certain jobs where that kind of way to encourage is not built into the system. So, a prime example of, I talk to my friends about this quite a lot, that our parents aren't used to being like overly, it's always, oh, you could have done better. So there's also, there's also a downside to the inferiority complex, where it's when you're never praised, you're always striving to do better, but it can also backfire when you're never given the credit. And I think what one part of the work that you're doing that makes it so special and credible is the fact that with these individuals, you're telling them to be more visible about the things that they deserve to be visible about. So you're giving them that sense of credibility.
I think it's permission as well. Henry Ford was very famously quoted as saying, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah.
I love that that study's been done, because I'm more art than science sometimes. It's something that I've seen reflected. And it's the reason why, despite my kind of demeanour, if somebody is really, really rubbish, terrible at something, I won't kind of blow smoke, and I won't say, oh, you're really good at that, if they're not. At the same time, I won't be kind of like killing their buzz. But I just think it's important that people see their greatness. So I'm not surprised that they performed a lot better when they were told, oh, we're looking at this, or we're doing that, because they believed they can, so they did. And I think sometimes just having that bit of belief, it's two sides of the same stick, isn't it? That you can do this, and you can do anything you want to. And which was said to me when I got 94% in an exam, and one of my parents, shall remain nameless, said, "So what happened to the other 6%?"
Yeah.
Straight off the bat, when I was like excited, and so I think it's two sides of the same stick. I'm not even surprised at that, because it's what I see in the work. So I do encourage people when they're doing great things, and also if they're not doing so greatly, I'll talk to them about it as well, but not from a place of judgment or shaming or anything like that. What's the point? You're not going to get anyone to change your mind by shaming and judging them, are you? So
yeah. And I wanted to go slightly left field here, but you were expecting twins at one point.
Yes.
What, this period in your life, what impact did that have on your own career and your purpose and where you saw your life headed?
It was a completely mentally messed up time, I would say, because on the surface, I remember like 4 days coming out of hospital, and people would say to me, like, or some people, because some people are scared of the conversation, like, how are you doing? And I might have just been like staring at the floor for 12 hours. I'd be like, ping, I'm doing really great, thanks. How are you doing? How's the family? You know, blah, blah, blah. So it's like this automatic pilot kicked in. It's in those times, it's a time of like incredible highs and incredible lows. And I think there's lots of different like tragedies that I hear. But I think losing twins for me and for people that kind of go through the sad journey of baby loss and that kind of stuff, it's such a raw pain. You know, you don't have the personalities to be able to reflect back as you do in usual grief. It's just such a raw pain. So it was a time of highs, a time of lows. There were a couple of weird things that happened in there. When it very first happened, I had this really strong sense that I was going to be okay. And I don't know where that came from. I didn't do any affirmations. I didn't do any mantras. It was all a shock and all very sudden. I couldn't prepare myself for it, but I had this deep sense that I was going to be okay, like mentally, physically, and everything else. And then some other things. I mean, it's like I'm not scared of having tough conversations. And I think some of that was probably built into my upbringing anyway. But if somebody has gone through grief or something like that, I won't be afraid to say, like, how are you really doing? Like, you know, if you want to speak or talk to me about it, you can. In fact, one of my clients, and it gave me goosebumps because it resonated, even though I kind of didn't almost understand it. They said to me a few years ago, they were going through something quite tough. And this is the other thing. Sometimes, like, if I'm coaching or mentoring somebody, they'll say, oh, I can't talk to you today. This really bad thing's happened. It's got nothing to do with work. And I'm like, no, bring it to the table. Let's talk about it. It's important. And I've even been known to say, if you feel like it's a waste of time, I'll give you back another session, you know? And this client said to me, I've worked with coaches before that have held my hand, walked to the riverbank, and then said, I'll meet you at the other side. She said, you held my hand, and she said, you walked with me through the valley of the shadow of death.
Wow. And
when she said that, and it's still today, I kind of go, oh, you know. And I think it was a gift, and I have referred to it before as a gift in ugly wrapping, but I think it was a gift because it kind of made me not so afraid of those human interactions. And it was very character building. Yet the day before the funeral, because of the age of the twins and stuff, they were too young to be recognised as being born, but old enough to be, I guess we should put a trigger warning on this for anyone who might have been going through this, but okay to have a funeral or a service for them. So the day before the service, like, my head was all over the place. I literally couldn't hold a thought in my head because I kept thinking about what about tomorrow. Apart from a company that I was doing some associate work for wanted to put a pitch to a really big, like, international brand. It was a multi-million-pound pitch. And I'd helped them prepare the pitch, and they wanted me to come and present the training function of it. And I still think, it's like I'm telling you this, and I'm still thinking, did I really do this? I went into London because I lived outside of London at the time. I came into London. I went to what we nicknamed a beauty parade, where, you know, different people are giving this presentation. And I'd prepared for it. I had some slides for it. And I just had this moment before, I think because I was in this grief stage of sod it. Like, I literally ripped up the presentation. And I just stood there and I had 10 minutes and I said, well, I had a presentation prepared for you and I was going to tell you all about the benefits of this service and but I want to tell you a story. And I just literally, it was like I was channeling something. So I just told them a story of when I was young and I went to Barbados at 7 and my aunt had made my sister a birthday cake. and it was like a doll. It was like a Barbie doll with the dress, but the dress was the cake and edible. I'd never seen anything so like spectacular in my life. I was fascinated. And I knew that when I was older, I wanted to make cakes like that. I didn't know how, but I was just like looking at it. I think my aunt thought I was going to eat it, but I was like looking at it, staring at it. And the story that I told when it came to learning and training was not the importance of doing something and getting it right. It's the importance of being able to fail, being able to try it, being able to mess it up, being able to do it right and think, can I do it again? So I just like told them this story and said, you know, and I'll hand you back over to the rest of the team, and went and walked and sat outside. This is like now 3:30 the day before the crematorium and the service and all of that. And I honestly thought I was going to be in bits that day. And as I sat outside, one of the directors came out and said, I really shouldn't tell you this, but that was such an amazing talk. We definitely will be going with your, you know, not my company, but with the company. So inspiring. And we can see that you've got a really great team together. Wow. And the funny thing was they all stayed there. And I said to them, I need to go back to get ready for tomorrow. So with that, I left and that was that. But on paper, if you tell anyone or were to tell anyone that you're going to go through this like kind of life-changing experience, but still be able to conduct yourself in a pretty normal way, they probably wouldn't believe you. So it was a gift in so many ways. Highs, lows, swings, roundabouts. But the times that I thought I was going to be upset or couldn't cope were exactly the opposite. And the times I thought I'd be okay, I'd be in bits. It just didn't make any sense. So yeah, it was a really important lesson. And obviously with the passage of time, this was like 2010 now. I'm always happy to speak about it, apart from if someone's pregnant, I get really like, oh, you know, it won't need to happen to you, you know. But I think it's important to talk about these things because I think sometimes, especially in our cultures, again, it's a don't go speaking your business, be strong. You know, Black women particularly are known, and there's research now about this, are known for their strength and being strong, to the point that, the research that's shown about the amount of deaths in childbirth in the UK, by the way, before anyone starts thinking we're talking about some kind of out there place. Yeah. It's been warranted. So there's this strength that is had. We don't have to have it, but it's kind of there, you know?
Yeah. And how did that experience change what you considered important in terms of your life purpose or your life mission?
It was funny because I was doing a lot of work at that time for a company called Salesforce.com. And it was I really liked it, but it was quite stressful because if you think about it, big companies were building systems that were being bespoke. You know, it was going to be rolled out in a week's time, and I had to train their staff maybe a few weeks before the system was finished. So you'd be trying to put training together on something you didn't even know what it looked like, and it was so last minute and stressful. And I remember there being this point in time where it's like it's almost like I had to pick a horse. Am I going to continue doing this and training in this way, or am I going to do something different? I was also at the time training and coaching cakes and chocolates, and I decided in 2012 to stop doing those as well. But it made me, for someone who's quite indecisive, it made me quite decisive in terms of what I wanted to do, because I just kept thinking, like, literally life is too short.
Yeah,
it's too short to mess around. So it had that effect, and it made me pick that horse, and then I went down that route.
It's powerful. And I know that you've some of the signs of the work that you've done, you've already been recognized for. I think you were awarded the Mentor of the Year by Future You.
Yeah, the Institute of Travel and Tourism. That was a shocker. I cried like a baby when they announced that. I was in bits for hours. See, this is the thing, it doesn't make sense. I think the reason that I'm most proud of that particular award is that in the industry that I've been working in, it's quite popular now that people say, oh, you've been shortlisted for this award and you've got to then get as many people to vote for you. I was put in for this award amongst some really great people within the travel industry, some very big companies within the travel industry. And then I was shortlisted and I was like, oh my gosh, like, how can it get any better? And then on the day they had this online conference. It's 2020 now. They had this online conference and I'd only intended to re-watch the piece that I'd pre-recorded just to kind of interact online. And it was such a good conference. I ended up watching the whole thing, trying to work on the side. And the announcement of the Mentor of the Year award was right at the end. So I sat there and they read out the short list of names and said, you know, to these people, you know, you did so well. And they read out names. And I thought, well, my name's not there. So it'll be in the next round of Off You Go. And they said, and the winner is... And they said, Jenny Kovacs. And I literally just went, and then burst into tears. And I physically couldn't speak to anyone because I was so in pieces. My friends laughed at me, but I was like, I'll speak to you later. I was like that for hours. So I'm so glad it wasn't live.
And so what's next for you?
Oh gosh, what's next? I would like to write more about my system. I'd actually like to get it accredited because, you know, like with many things, people say, oh, they don't teach that in schools. Wouldn't it be great if you could teach children how to like position themselves, not professionally because they're still kids. We don't want to take that from them. But my work includes things like presentations, doing it in a professional way, but a way that still feels and sounds like you, in a way that benefits your company. For some people, it might be selling the services of the companies that they work for or their own companies. And just like embedding those kind of principles early on, because the thing that comes back the most from my work, regardless of who it's been, whatever industry, is they say, oh, I feel excited. And they feel really confident. And I don't see myself as a confidence coach. And as I say, I don't think that people that come to me don't have the confidence, but the stories that I get told about it, I think it's something we can do for our children, because I think when you've got that like inner unshakable confidence, just think of the stuff that you can go out and do in the world.
Yeah.
You know? So I would like to get that accredited. So I'm on a bit of a mission to start looking at how I can do that. That's the main thing. Other than that, I'm working on a secret project that only you and I know about. So once that's out there, which the timelines are really long, perhaps we'll come back and I'll get you.
I was going to say it'll be a perfect time for a part 2 because honestly, this has been super insightful. You know, I love how much you've been able to be open about, you know, not only your family history, but, you know, the experiences you went through from the highs and the lows. And, you know, I just have to thank you for showing that side of yourself, because I think it's very clear to see how you're able to be this queen of being seen. You know, not to mimic what the others said, but, you know, you communicated and you expressed that really eloquently. So
thank you.
I do appreciate that. We have a closing tradition on this show where the previous guest will have left 2 questions for you. What is a talent or interest that you have that most people don't know about?
This is an interesting one. A lot of people don't know. Like I've always liked cooking. I went to catering college and all of that, but I genuinely love cooking. If you give me 5 ingredients and say, I've got nothing in the house, I don't know what to make for dinner, give me 5 things that you've got in your cupboard, and I'm just like, yeah, you can make this, you can do that, you can do this, you can do that. So it's like one of my little party tricks, but many people don't know that. But I love food. Anyone that knows me well knows I love food.
Love that. And the second question is, what advice would you give to someone who is struggling specifically with their cultural identity?
So there's a couple of different ways to kind of slice that. Get specific, just for you, not for anyone else. Get specific on what it is exactly that you're struggling with. And I say this because it's quite a difficult thing to kind of fess up to yourself. There's a lot of shame and all of those sorts of emotions that can come up because people feel like they're embarrassed or they shouldn't feel a certain way. So I think get really clear on that. And this is going to sound strange given the cultures that we've come from. Don't talk to your family about it. Don't talk to your nearest and dearest about it. I'm not asking you to, be quiet or anything else like that, but they will have their own thoughts and their own beliefs and their own stuff, which they'll inadvertently project onto you. They'll project because they're either trying to protect you, trying to comfort you, trying to persuade you or something else. So I would say, don't speak to your family, your immediate family about it. Find somebody that you can speak to. This is where coaches and mentors come in really, really handy. And given that you have been doing this podcast, I think you'd be perfect for them to say, this is how I feel about stuff, because you're now gleaning insights from so many different people. And sorry, Coaching Federation, but some of the best coaches I know aren't actually qualified to be coaches. They've got very good questioning and listening skills. So get some support from somewhere outside, somewhere that feels a bit neutral that you can speak to. And then the other thing I think is, because you've started off getting clarity and getting very specific on what it is that you is kind of not working or troubling you, you can look to turn it around. Now, in my mind, something like that is quite transformational. So it's not going from one thing to the opposite thing. People say, oh, I was a smoker, now I'm a non-smoker. Sometimes it was, I was a smoker, but now I've got more energy to run around with my kids. There's another path. And I think you can find that other path when you kind of like look at those things. So have a look at here's a good question. What would you rather have instead of, oh, I feel ashamed because I'm mixed race and I don't identify with one side of my family to another? What would you rather have instead? And the first thing that comes into your mind, don't go, no, it can't be that. That doesn't sound right. Like, explore it. And it will lead to a path, I think, and show you more of that. And then the other thing, which is weird, which I think is a visibility thing, full stop. Sometimes the very things that we want to hide about ourselves are the things that we should put out there. And I say should purposefully, but it is the thing that we should put out there. So if we think, oh, people won't like me because my hair's too afro or something like that, and then you start to go out in the world with your hair too afro, you'll start to see the lighter side of what people actually like about it, and that builds your confidence. So the more you do the thing, the better you feel about the thing, and it's kind of self-perpetuating and self-validating. I don't know if that even makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to reframing either what you see as negative or reframing the sacrifice that you've made. Like you said, stopping from smoking doesn't mean I no longer smoke. Yes, it does. But it also, like you said, means I can run better. The reframing is important. I just have to say, thank you so much for those answers. I've learned a ton from you, way more than I set out to learn. So I appreciate everything that you've shared. I can't wait to keep in touch and see where you go next.
Thank you so much. This has been an absolute joy. I feel like we could do a whole TV series on this, get even more people in. Let's do it.
If there's any TV producers or directors out there, I'm sure we'll be happy to hear.
Any 2-degree connections from us on LinkedIn, feel free to contact him, really.
Drop us a message. Jenny, your details will also be in the show notes, so anyone can reach out to you. But what is your normal preference in being able to get contacted on?
The easiest way to contact me is LinkedIn.
Yep.
LinkedIn, but if not, I'm on all other social media channels. That's probably the easiest way.
Good stuff. Thanks again.
Thank you.